Tucker had made a habit of leaving before sunrise. It was easier that way. Towns looked less disappointed in the gray light. People were still asleep. No goodbyes, no promises, no roots. He rode into Briar's Hollow just before dusk, dust clinging to his coat and the long trail behind him. The town looked like most others he'd passed through. One wide street, wooden storefronts, a saloon with music spilling into the evening air, and a scattering of homes resting beneath a painted western sky. He only meant to stay the night. He tied his horse outside the boarding house, paid for a room, and would have headed straight upstairs if the smell hadn't stopped him. Bread, warm, sweet, fresh. He followed the scent down the street until he reached a bakery glowing gold from within. The windows were fogged slightly from heat, and inside a woman stood behind a wide wooden table, sleeves rolled, flour dusting her dark hair. Pearl. He didn't know her name yet, but he would. She moved with steady confidence, kneading dough like she had done it 1,000 times before. There was strength in her arms and something stubborn in the set of her jaw. Tucker stood outside longer than he meant to. The bell above the door jingled when he stepped inside. Pearl didn't look up at first. "We're closing in 10 minutes, she said calmly. "I won't take long." Now, she looked at him. Her eyes were sharp and assessing, not the fluttering kind that trailed most drifters. She took in his worn boots, the revolver at his hip, the guarded expression he wore like armor. "Passing through?" she asked. "Always am." She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter. "Coffee's fresh. Bread's fresher." He nodded once. "Coffee." She poured it into a thick ceramic mug and slid it toward him. He placed a coin on the counter. She didn't immediately take it. "Most men who say they're passing through end up staying longer than they planned," she said. "Not me." That confidence sounds rehearsed. He lifted the mug, taking a slow sip. It was strong and smooth. Better than he expected. "What makes you so certain?" he asked. She met his gaze without hesitation. "Because no one wanders forever unless they're running from something." His jaw tightened slightly. "Or toward something." "Are you?" He didn't answer. The bakery was warm. Too warm. It felt lived in, real, the kind of place that expected people to return, that made him uncomfortable. "I leave at dawn," he said finally. "Of course you do." There was no challenge in her tone, no pleading, just calm certainty that unsettled him more than anything. He finished his coffee and stood. "Good bread," he admitted. "Good town," she replied. He stepped toward the door. "See you in the morning," she added casually. He paused, doubtful. Pearl only smiled. And somehow that smile followed him all the way back to his room. He lay awake longer than usual that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of Briar's Hollow, settling into sleep. He told himself it was just another town, another stop, another dawn departure. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't entirely certain he would leave when the sun came up. Tucker was awake before the sky began to lighten. Old habits didn't loosen easily. He dressed in the dim gray stillness, rolled his bedroll tight, and carried it downstairs without making a sound. The boarding house was quiet, the air cold enough to sting his lungs as he stepped outside. Dawn was only a faint promise along the horizon. He saddled his horse with efficient movements, tightening the cinch and checking the straps. He didn't look toward the bakery. He didn't need to. The scent reached him before the sight did. Fresh bread, sugar, and something sweet enough to make a man hesitate. He glanced anyway. Light glowed through the bakery windows. "Stubborn woman," he muttered under his breath. He should have mounted up and ridden out. Instead, he tied the reins loosely and walked down the street. The bell above the bakery door rang softly when he stepped inside. Pearl didn't look surprised. "I was wondering how long you'd last," she said, sliding a tray of golden biscuits from the oven. "I was leaving." "You still can." He removed his hat, brushing dust from the brim. "You always open this early." "Bread doesn't wait for the sun." She placed a biscuit on a small plate and pushed it toward him without asking. Steam curled upward in soft spirals. "I didn't order." "Eat," she interrupted calmly. He stared at it a moment before breaking it open. Butter melted instantly into the center. He took a bite. He closed his eyes before he could stop himself. Pearl caught that. Thought so, she said quietly. You do this on purpose. Would make it hard to leave. She leaned her palms on the counter. If good food is all it takes to keep you, you weren't going far to begin with. That irritated him. I don't stay, he said flatly. Why? He shrugged. Nothing worth staying for. Pearl tilted her head slightly. That's not the same as there being nothing. Silence stretched between them. Outside, the first streaks of pink brushed the sky. Townsfolk would wake soon. You ever consider, she continued, that maybe you're not meant to wander forever? I don't belong anywhere. That's convenient. His eyes narrowed. Convenient. It saves you from trying. He let out a quiet breath through his nose. You don't know anything about me. You're right, she said evenly. But I know fear when I see it. That hit deeper than he liked. I'm not afraid. No, she asked. Then stay a week. He blinked. A week, 7 days, she said. Help around town. Fix what needs fixing. If you still want to ride at the end of it, I won't stop you. You think this town needs saving. I think it needs hands that don't shake, and a man who knows how to build, instead of burn bridges. He stared at her. You always challenge strangers like this, he asked. Only the ones pretending they don't care. The morning light grew stronger, warming the edges of the room. Dust motes floated lazily in the air between them. A week, he repeated slowly. She nodded once. If you're so certain you can't stay, 7 days won't hurt. He hated that she made it sound simple. Fine, he said finally. 7 days. Pearl didn't smile wide or celebrate. She only turned back to her dough. I'll expect you tomorrow, she said. North pasture fence collapsed in last week's storm. He frowned. You're giving me orders already. Call it employment, she replied. He shook his head, but felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Purpose. He finished the biscuit and stepped outside. The sun was rising fully now. He untied his horse, but instead of mounting, he led it back toward the stable. 7 days. He could survive 7 days. What he didn't know yet was that staying would prove harder than leaving ever had, and Pearl Whitmore had no intention of letting him slip away quietly. By the third morning, Tucker had already done more for Briar's Hollow than he had intended. He fixed the north pasture fence before the sun climbed high, driving posts deep into stubborn earth and stretching new wire tight. He repaired a broken wagon axle for the widow Carter. He even climbed onto the church roof, replacing loose shingles while children gathered below to watch. Word traveled fast in small towns. By afternoon, people greeted him by name. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. Names made things personal. Personal made things complicated. Still, when he passed the bakery that evening, he didn't hesitate before stepping inside. Pearl was arranging loaves in the front window, golden crusts catching the late sunlight. The shop smelled of cinnamon and honey. You're late, she said without turning. I didn't know. I had a curfew. You don't, she replied calmly. But I saved you a slice of peach pie. He paused. You assumed I'd come back. I knew you would. For confidence unsettled him, but he took the offered plate anyway. He sat at one of the small wooden tables by the window. Outside, the town drifted into its slow evening rhythm. You work hard, she said, wiping flour from her hands. So do you? She gave a small shrug. This bakery was my father's. After he passed, it felt wrong to let it go. Tucker glanced around. You run it alone. Yes. Doesn't that get lonely? Pearl met his eyes steadily. Sometimes, but staying means building something. Even if you build it alone at first. He shifted in his seat. Not everyone's meant to build. That's not true, she said gently. Some people just haven't decided where. Her words lingered longer than he liked. He finished the pie slowly, aware of how comfortable the room felt. Too comfortable, like it expected him to belong there. You ever think about leaving? He asked suddenly. Pearl shook her head. Why would I? To see what's out there. She smiled faintly. I know what's out there. Dust, trouble, men who don't stay. He almost laughed. You make me sound predictable. You are predictable. He raised an eyebrow. You came in guarded, she continued. You work like you're trying to outrun something, and every time you laugh, You look surprised. It caught him off guard. I don't laugh that much. You do now. He didn't have an answer for that. Outside, the sky deepened into soft violet. A few lanterns flickered to life along the street. Town dance is Saturday, Pearl said casually. I don't dance. You have legs, don't you? That's not the same thing. She stepped closer to his table. You're staying until the end of the week. That was the agreement. Then, you're taking me. He studied her face. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't flirting, the way some women did when they wanted something. She was daring him. Why? He asked quietly. Because, she said. Softer now. If you're going to decide whether to leave, you should know what you're leaving. Something shifted in his chest at that. He had left towns before, without a second glance. He'd left before anyone could matter. But Briar's Hollow was beginning to feel less like a stop along the road, and more like a choice. I'll think about it, he said. Pearl tilted her head. You're still here. That again. He stood, placing the empty plate back on the counter. Don't get ahead of yourself. I won't, she replied lightly. But you should. He stepped outside into the cooling air. Children waved as they ran past him. Old Mr. Halstead tipped his hat in thanks. Tucker stood in the middle of the street for a long moment. 7 days, he had told himself. But already, something deeper was taking root beneath the dust of his boots. And for the first time in years, the thought of riding away didn't feel like freedom. It felt like loss. Saturday arrived, wrapped in golden light and restless anticipation. By late afternoon, Briar's Hollow buzzed with preparation for the town dance. Lanterns were strung across the open yard beside the church. Long wooden tables were set with jars of wildflowers. Someone tuned a fiddle near the steps, its notes rising and falling like the promise of a warm night. Tucker spent most of the day repairing the stable doors behind the saloon, trying to ignore the steady pull in his chest. His week was nearly over. Tomorrow at dawn, he could ride. He tightened the last hinge with more force than necessary. You fixing that door? Old Mr. Halstead called out, or punishing it? Tucker stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. Bit of both. Halstead chuckled knowingly. Dance starts at sundown. Wouldn't keep Pearl waiting? Tucker froze slightly. Who says I'm going? Halstead only smiled and walked away. The entire town seemed convinced he was staying. That made leaving harder. As the sun dipped low, Tucker returned to the boarding house to wash the dust from his face. He stared at his reflection in the small mirror. The scar along his jaw caught the fading light. He'd earned that scar in a town he left too quickly before he could protect someone who mattered. Staying had cost him once. Leaving had felt safer ever since. He stepped outside, just as the first lanterns flickered to life. Pearl stood near the edge of the dance floor. She wore a simple deep blue dress, sleeves modest, skirt brushing her boots. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands catching the warm glow of lantern light. She wasn't looking for him. She was waiting, without expectation. That somehow struck him harder. He approached slowly. You clean up decent, she said, eyes sweeping over him. You're overdressed for a stubborn baker. She smiled faintly. I own more than flour sacks, you know. The music began a lively fiddle tune that set feet tapping immediately. Couples stepped forward, laughter weaving into the rhythm. You don't have to dance, Pearl said. That sounds like a trap. It's not. She hesitated. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. That was the difference. She wasn't trying to hold him. She was giving him the choice. He held out his hand. One dance, he told himself. She placed her hand in his, warm and steady. They moved awkwardly at first, Tucker stiff and unsure, but Pearl guided gently, her laughter light when he missed. You're not terrible, she teased. High praise. The music softened into a slower tune. The space between them narrowed naturally. You're leaving tomorrow, she said quietly. He didn't answer immediately. That was the plan. And now, he looked down at her. I don't know how to stay, he admitted. Her expression softened. You don't have to know how. You just decide. It's not that simple. It can be. He swallowed hard. I've lost people before. So have I. The words hung heavy. My father built this bakery with his bare hands, she continued softly. When he passed, I wanted to close it, leave, but staying felt harder. So I stayed. And Was it worth it? She met his eyes. Yes. The music slowed further, lantern light swaying gently above them. You think I'm afraid, he said. I think you've convinced yourself leaving protects you. He tightened his jaw. What if staying hurts more? He asked. Pearl's voice was steady. Then, at least you'll have something worth hurting for. The song ended. Applause rose around them, but Tucker barely heard it. He stepped back, releasing her hand slowly. I need air, he muttered. He walked toward the edge of town, where darkness swallowed the lantern glow. His horse waited in the stable, saddled earlier out of habit. He stood beside it for a long time. Dawn would come. It always did. The question was whether he would meet it riding away, or standing still. For the first time in years, the choice felt heavier than the saddle in his hands. Tucker didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his narrow boarding house bed, boots on, hat resting beside him, listening to the quiet hum of Briar's Hollow, settling after the dance. Laughter had faded. Lanterns had dimmed. The town was wrapped in the kind of peace he had never allowed himself to keep. His saddlebags were packed. His horse was ready. Everything was prepared for departure. Just like always. He had told himself that 7 days wouldn't change anything, that helping mend fences and roofs wouldn't mend whatever had long ago splintered inside him. That one stubborn baker couldn't make him reconsider a lifetime of leaving before roots took hold. But Pearl hadn't pleaded. She hadn't begged. She hadn't tried to bind him with promises or tears. She had simply offered him a place in the choice. Before dawn, Tucker stepped outside. The sky was still dark, a pale silver line stretching along the horizon. The air was cool and quiet, carrying the faint scent of flour and wood smoke, drifting from the bakery. Of course, she was awake. He almost smiled. He walked to the stable and placed a steady hand on his horse's neck. The animal shifted softly, ready to move at the slightest signal. Not yet, Tucker murmured. He untied the reins, and then he didn't mount. Instead, he led the horse back into the stall and removed the saddle. Each buckle he loosened felt like unfastening a habit he had worn for years. By the time the first streak of pink touched the sky, he was walking down the main street toward the bakery. Pearl stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, apron dusted white. She wasn't watching the road. She was kneading dough. He paused outside for a long moment before stepping in. The bell chimed above the door. She glanced up. Her expression didn't change. Not hope, not expectation, just quiet acknowledgement. You're late, she said softly. For leaving, he asked. For breakfast. He took off his hat, slowly. I unsaddled my horse. Her hands stilled for just a second before continuing their steady rhythm. That's so. I figured the north pasture fence might need checking again, he said casually. And winter's coming. Roof on the church won't hold through heavy snow unless someone keeps an eye on it. Someone responsible, she replied. Seems that way. Silence settled between them, warm and full. He stepped closer to the counter. I don't know how to stay, he admitted. I've been leaving too long. Pearl wiped her hands on her apron and met his gaze. You don't need to know how. You just wake up and choose it again the next day. And the day after. And the day after that. He let out a slow breath. I can't promise forever, he said. I'm not asking for forever. Then, what are you asking for? She held his eyes, steady and brave. Tomorrow, he felt something shift fully into place inside him. Not fear, not panic. Peace. I can do tomorrow, he said quietly. Pearl reached across the counter and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, dusted lightly, with flour real solid. Not fleeting. You can unpack upstairs, she said gently. There's room. He nodded once. Outside. The sun rose fully over Briar's Hollow, spilling gold across wooden storefronts and quiet streets. For the first time in years, Tucker wasn't measuring distance or calculating miles. He was thinking about repairing shelves inside the bakery, about staying through winter, about spring planting, about what it might mean to build instead of drift. He squeezed Pearl's hand lightly. I guess I'm not riding out at dawn, he said. She smiled. Not victorious, not triumphant, just certain. No, she replied softly. You're not. And in that quiet bakery, with flour in the air and sunlight warming the windows, Tucker understood something he had spent years outrunning. Leaving was easy. Staying took courage, and for the first time, he was ready to be brave. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.